Inputting these direct questions to you, Matthew Green challenges ex-Ottawa Police Chief Peter Sloly. Were you the scapegoat for the truckers' convoy? He admits that he was pressured to step down. Here's the clip.
Second round. Mr. Green.
Merci. Thank you very much, and welcome to the committee, Mr. Sloly. You know, I think this is a good opportunity for this committee to help perhaps clear the air on some inconsistencies that we've seen both in the public discourse around this and the lead up to your departure, to what, you know, I would personally view as a breakdown in policing as it relates to the occupation and the events that ultimately led to the invocation of this act. In his testimony before this committee, Minister Bill Blair, I put a question to him about your statement that there may not be a police solution to the demonstration and that the institutions and police services were unprepared for the convoy. In his response, Minister Bill Blair said, "I accept Chief Sloly's assessment that he was unprepared for what took place in Ottawa." I want to give you a chance to respond to that. Were you unprepared for what happened in Ottawa, or was the Ottawa Police Service unprepared for what happened here?
Well, unfortunately, the context in which I made my statement was clearly misunderstood. Let me be clear, and I said it again today. Institutions, public institutions across this country were unprepared for what happened during those weeks. That included police services and national security organizations. And yes, that includes the Ottawa Police Service. But there were structural deficits across multiple institutional lines.
And within the OPS, sir, you know, there had been reporting, at least through the RCMP, about internal documents that were worried about the threat of Mounties sympathetic to leaking information to convoy protesters. There were certainly, there was firsthand accounts and live streams of the relationship that seemed to form between some officers in a very cooperative way and the occupation. You know, in the lead up to it, and in fact on your resignation on the 15th of February, you stated that you were confident that the Ottawa Police Service was better positioned to end the occupation. So what changed materially from when you took on the pre-planning for this and when you resigned? Did the morale or did the actions or inactions of your officers have anything to do with it?
Singularly, the difference in my statement that we were better prepared. We had a significantly upgraded plan from almost a week before. That plan called for a massive incursion of resources. I had identified 1,800. Ultimately, there were 2,000.
So if you were prepared and you had a plan, why resign?
If you're asking the reason for my resignation,
correct.
Sir, thank you. There are a number of reasons that go into any person's decision to resign, particularly from a high-profile public office. Many of them are extremely personal to me and my family, but the number one reason was for public safety. The reason for public safety was that there was increasing levels of doubt about the capabilities of the Ottawa Police Service, lowering levels of public trust in the midst of an unfolding local and national security crisis. And when trust starts to leave policing, that increases public safety risks. As the head of the organization, I had accountability for the organization. And I made a decision, ultimately, I made a decision for public safety to remove myself from the equation.
Do you feel that perhaps you took too much of a center stage? I mean, obviously, in policing, in the position that you're in, you would have deputies who would be operational. Which deputies would have been operational to the implementation and planning processes?
The operational deputy was Acting Deputy Chief Trish Ferguson.
And the interim Chief Bell, what role would Chief Bell have played?
He was assigned intelligence operations.
Okay. Because from my standpoint, you know, and from many other people from the outside looking in, you know, it looked like perhaps there may have been a scenario where you didn't have complete command and control over frontline officers. Is that a fair or unfair assessment?
Our frontline officers did an amazing job in almost unhuman circumstances, minus 35-degree temperatures for weeks on end. Our frontline members, civilian and sworn, did a great job as much as they possibly could in those circumstances and throughout my tenure as chief of police.
Sir, the plan didn't work, right? Like they doubled down on the occupation with coordination with the city. They occupied a staging area at Coventry. They were bringing in diesel. We know through past threat assessments that, you know, having design threats are a major issue coming out of the Toronto 18, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and our former member Vern White had referenced in previous testimony. So the plan actually didn't work leading up to that, and yet upon your resignation, it was your assertion that they were better prepared to take on the threat.
The plan worked, sir. There was a safe and successful end to the occupation and the national security crisis. It was based on the plan that was updated and continuously evolved through every day in office. My statement in my last day in office affirmed that we had a plan, we were now receiving significant new levels of resources, and that we could foresee an end, a safe, successful, lawful end to the events here and nationally. And that is what happened within the week.
Mr. Green, your
Thank
time
you.
is up. Mr. Green, can I ask you to time? I'm up next. 3 minutes.
Thank you. In my first round of questions, perhaps I danced around what I wanted to get to the heart of the matter of, looking at this event and how they took place, looking across the country. You seem to be the only person in senior leadership who took accountability for what happened across the country. So I'm going to put some very direct questions to you. And I'm going to reference a letter from the police union president, Matt Scoff, on September 10th, 2020, who stated that you lost the room, that you inflamed the workplace. Did you at any time during the occupation, lead up to the occupation, have a challenge in the morale of your officers to raise to the size and scale and scope of the crisis due to perhaps some of the interpersonal HR issues that you might have been facing with the police?
Thank you, sir. I don't know any police chief in this country or anywhere else in North America, quite frankly, in the Five Eyes countries that doesn't have a morale challenge with their police officers that has been increasing year over year, decade over decade. That is not unique to the city of Ottawa.
With specificity, can you keep this on, please? With specificity, the challenge that I have is that you stay the course. On the 15th, you resign, and on the 18th, it's done. Right? So you stay on until after it's called, but then you resign within 24 hours. Did you at any point in time receive political pressure from your board or from the association or any other external factors politically? If we were to FOI emails, would we see from the mayor or from the police chair pressure on you to step down, to be the scapegoat, to perhaps pave the way for a fresh start for somebody else?
There are many people who have many theories around why I resigned. I've stated very publicly here, I resigned primarily for public safety reasons. There was declining trust in my organization, but implicitly declining trust in me. I took myself out of the equation once we had put in place the integrated operational plan to bring those resources to bear to safely and successfully end this. But, sir, I will
Where do
tell
you think
it
the
was
loss
a
of
highly
trust came?
politicized element.
There was a highly politicized element. Could you expand on
in
that?
every major event that I've ever been involved in, locally, provincially, nationally, or internationally, these events draw high political pressure.
Did you receive pressure from the board to step down?
Yes, I did.
Did you receive pressure from the police association to step down?
In this event, no, sir.
In previous events?
Yes, sir.
How would you reference your relationship with the police association?
Now I'm a private citizen.
Sure, before, while you were chief.
Highly contentious for the most part, but there were times we were able to cooperate and find mutual outcomes that supported our membership and the city as well.
When they say that you lost the room, during the course of the command and control during the occupation, did you have the room or had you lost the room?
The reference to losing the room was after I had presented before the National Committee on Public Safety and National Security on the issue of systemic racism in policing. And I stated emphatically, I believe I was the first chief in Canada to say that systemic racism was part of policing, in fact, part of every institution.
And they held that
in-
against you.
It was in that context and the fallout after that we had a very contentious period with the board and internally. As most organizations grapple with the issue of systemic racism, that's just a matter of course for
Last
any
question.
CEO.
Next round. Mr. Green.
Thank you. And so in carrying on the discussion around pressures leading to the decisions, as a police chief, I'm sure from time to time you would deal with insubordination. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Do you ever have, these things happen at a senior level? Like as you're drafting out a plan, is there a disagreement on style or substance? I know that in the media you talked about an elegant, beautiful plan not being available. Was there ever instances of insubordination within senior decision-making within your service?
Within the weeks of the
Yeah, leading up to the occupation and your time there.
I can tell you there were some incredibly stressful situations at all levels in the organization, and not just within my organization, across the theater that this was taking place in. But yeah, we had some incredibly contentious and challenging moments at all levels of the organization.
So
There was
in-
only one occasion that I would say would even come close to rising to the level of a definition of insubordination. But we were focused on public safety.
Well, I think one of the differences that you talked about, and I'll just use this as a bit of license, when you talk about the paradigm shift and you reference the infiltration of people with significant skill sets in the logistics and supply and planning, you reference counterintelligence, the way that this was situated. In your opinion, would this not go beyond the threshold of being sympathetic to, but actually being ideologically motivated by a cause when you cross that rubric from a sworn officer into civilian illegal occupations?
Sorry, just to be clear, the references to people who were former national security, military, and police, they were former. They were
Correct.
retired, and they were not part of my police service. to
Not
my
your
understanding.
service, but they're part of policing.
They're retired members, and they're now private citizens.
Correct. And you would have also witnessed people that were active duty with the fist bumps and some of the exchanges that were happening. There was the authorization, or at least lack of enforcement, on bringing incendiary devices into the precinct. Like when you reference design threat and you talk about canteens of diesel or gasoline or God knows what else, fertilizer, who knows what else, into the precinct. How does that happen? Whose decision is that to allow that to happen?
Again, I'm looking for the question, but I just want to be clear. Design threat is not a term that I'm familiar with. You've used it twice, and I just want to be clear about that. If you're asking about expressions of sympathy, I can tell you that, again, the ability for an officer to de-escalate a situation by a smile, a selfie, or a fist bump, if that achieves a public safety outcome in the moment that he or she, that officer, feels is reasonable given all the concerns, I've seen that applied over my 35 years in policing in a wide variety of circumstances. For a
I haven't.
wide variety of
I'll be clear with you. I
ideologies.
haven't seen it applied in many of the counter protests I've been involved in. But I digress. When we talk about threat assessment, when I talk about design threat, the fact that you have Wellington Street as an alleyway, buildings on one side, a crane set up in the middle of the street with a wrecking ball on it, people coming in with incendiary devices on the footsteps of the PMO's office and Parliament, that's what I talk about in terms of the design threat. The way in which the environment and the use of cars, and you'd reference not traditional illegal weapons, but cars and other things, would you have accounted for the other things, including fuel, gasoline, diesel, fertilizer, and other things?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was getting to with that. So in your assessment of the threat, where would you have placed it at its highest during the time that you were in care and control of the command?
The threat, again, there were literally thousands of threats within the theater that we were dealing with.
How would you assess the overall threat to the nation's capital? Would it be a high level of threat, i.e., to meet the threshold of the Emergency Act, it has to meet the threat to national security under the CSIS Act. Very prescriptive legal definitions of what it would mean, and part of our work is trying to figure out whether it met the threshold. So in your opinion, did it meet that threshold under the CSIS Act?
The entire situation that I saw unfolding across this city and across this country was, in my opinion, a national security crisis.
Meeting the threshold of the national, the Emergency Act measure.
I don't know the definition of it, and I'm not a lawyer, but
Okay.
I'm telling you as a police professional, the entire circumstances that I saw operating across this country was a national security crisis.
Last question. You've been involved at G20 and many other massive operations where lots of officers are coming in. Are you familiar with aid to civil power?
Yes, I am, sir.
And so why was that? Was that contemplated, and why wasn't that implemented?
Every single option was on the table. I think I'm publicly quoted saying that on a number of occasions.
Yeah, that's a thing to say publicly, but was the aid to civil power something that you advised we implement, or is that something that you put on the table and then took away?
I have no power to put anything on the table. But
You
I
can't
said-
request aid to civil power?
No, lawfully, I can't request it. But
Who
was I-
would?
Sorry, sir. I'm trying to answer your question. I did not ask anyone specifically to consider aid to civil power. But in all the discussions that took place in the weeks, that was a discussion that was a live and ongoing discussion. But I have no authority as a chief of police in a municipal agency to make that request or make that determination.
Does it come from the mayor?
Mr. Green, your time is up.
Okay, thank you.